Hello. Just gonna give this a moment to allow people to join. Hello, hello. And comments. Hi everyone. Just gonna give it a moment. As you're joining, let me know where you're joining in from. I am based in Rhode Island, USA right now. All right. London, hello. Beautiful. Welcome, welcome. Hi, everyone. All right. There's so much to get to, and I'm excited to talk some menstrual health with you all. So my name is Justine Miller, and I'm an Ayurvedic lifestyle educator, yoga teacher, and thank you to Molly Rituals for having me today. I am really passionate about sharing Ayurveda with yoga teachers to support yoga teachers in filling up their cups so they can show up as leaders in the community and to learn Ayurveda and supporting their students through seasonal transitions, life transitions, and I also do Ayurvedic wellness sessions. And women's health for me is just so important. It's not talked about enough. For me in the West, I didn't learn about my cycle or my health as a woman until I learned Ayurveda when I was 25 years old, and I'm 30 now. So I don't know if anyone else can relate what your experience has been in understanding your cycle and what it means to support our health. And so this topic is for anyone who menstruates. We'll talk about the menstrual cycle and Ayurveda's view on it. And I do have some notes because I do have a lot that I want to say about it. And so just a little bit about my background, my story in terms of learning about Ayurveda and menstrual health. I have done all of my training as an Ayurvedic health counselor and Ayurvedic yoga teacher at the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health. It's based in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. And I remember for me learning about Ayurveda, I was on antidepressants and I was on hormonal birth control for about almost 10 years at that point. And again, I'm not a doctor and I'm not here to tell you to get off any medication. I just want to share about my experience. And so when I was learning Ayurveda, I really felt I had the support to wean off my antidepressants. And I learned more about my cycle and what it meant that I was taking birth control. I think for me at 17 years old, I had really bad cramps in high school and when I was growing up. And of course, I wanted to have safe sex, and it was just the thing to do. There wasn't a lot of conversation about it. I didn't learn how it affected my body. I didn't know that on birth control that I was having a fake period, and my period felt like a nuisance. And I'm really passionate about reframing that conversation because our period is a sign of health. Or in our childbearing years, so they say, whether or not you choose to have children, but as we're menstruating. And it's just, I really want to shift the conversation of how can we honor our cycle? How can we support our cycle? How can we be grateful for our cycle? And it really bums me out. It really upsets me how, as women, we think of it as a nuisance and we want to get rid of it and we want to get on the pills that only let us have 4 cycles a year or none at all. And so, again, this conversation is hopefully just to educate you a little bit more so that you can perhaps have a new relationship with your cycle. So for me, I learned more about, oh my gosh, I'm having a fake period. This isn't even real. and learning the harmful effects of hormonal birth control on my body. And so I was in a position in learning Ayurveda, feeling support, seeing a therapist in terms of my antidepressants, and I wanted to get off my antidepressants and my birth control. And so I did that process. Again, not recommending you do that unless you have support and, conversation with your doctor. But I was able to wean off my antidepressants and get off my hormonal birth control, leaning into the self-care practices of Ayurveda. And I looked more at my diet, I looked more at my lifestyle practices, and this is what supported me in doing so. So as a 25-year-old, I got off my birth control and I started to regulate my cycle a bit. And how I did that was, again, just paying attention to the foods that I was eating, and I paid attention to the moon. So how fascinating. Our women's cycle is about 29 days on average, and that's in sync with the moon. And I think what we forget, I believe that men go through their hormonal cycles within 24 hours, and women, we go through it within like 29 days, right? So I think as a someone who identifies as a woman in this world with women's hormones, I have seen and a lot of Vata imbalances. So Vata meaning air and ether. This can happen when we're on the go a lot and hustling and working a lot, and then we might experience anxiety and stress. And it's not to say like a woman can't do what a man can do. We all know that's not true. But it is saying that women do need to take care of ourselves a bit more. I've learned that men can reach rejuvenation through activity, and women reach rejuvenation through rest. And I think that rest is a radical idea. I think it's a radical idea in our society, in our culture. And I think that in this global pandemic, my hope is that the gift of it has allowed people to have the permission. We've had cultural permission, societal permission to rest. And I hope it's given people the inquiry of like, oh, what does that feel like? Now I have this permission from society. How can I move forward with this concept of rest? And so when I got off my birth control and I was reacquainting myself with my natural menstrual cycle, I did experience cramps. I remember when I was a kid, I was on a swim team and my cramps would be so bad that I would miss a week of practice because I also could not handle putting a tampon in at 12 years old either. It was more the cardboard applicators back in the day. And so revisiting my natural period, I was like, oh wow, I have these cramps, it's not fun. And so I learned more about how to, again, align myself with the moon and to align myself with, it is possible to have pain-free periods. I want to let you know that because I experienced that. What? So when it comes to the menstrual cycle, how Ayurveda views it is that a healthy menstrual flow is bright red in color. It has no foul odor. It does not stain. And it has, the amount is about 4 anjalis. And an anjali is the amount that is in your cupped hand. So this varies from person to person, from constitution to constitution. So it would be 4 of these. Your cupped hands would be the amount of your healthy flow. So again, bright red in color, does not stain, no foul odor, and in quantity it's about 4 anjalis. And maybe you're thinking, my menstrual flow is not bright red, mine maybe has a little bit of a smell to it, mine definitely stains my underwear. So I think it's good that we have these conversations and there's ways to support your cycle and support yourself. So I just want to share an experience I had in 2018. So I've been off hormonal birth control for the past 5 years. And in 2018, I had this experience that I was Ayurvedic health coaching. I was hostessing at a restaurant. I was working with a ghee company and making ghee in the kitchen. I was working farmers markets. I was teaching yoga. And so I don't know if you can imagine just the amount of doing I was doing, the amount of hustling and working and being on so much. I remember actually being at a farmer's market that summer and hiding underneath the table for just like a minute or two of rest. And I had a couple experiences that year with my menstrual cycle where I vomited because of the pain of the cramps I had. And so let me know, you guys, in the comments too, like some of your experiences with your menstrual cycle. I'd love to hear. We can be in this conversation together. I had never experienced that when I was a kid. I did have cramps, but I never had the intense pain that I actually vomited because of it. And for me, that was a huge wake-up call, because how I view our menstrual cycle from the Ayurvedic lens as well is how well did I take care of myself each month, right? It's like a marker of how is our menstrual cycle. If it's pain-free and maybe we just feel a little fatigued, like I'm like, oh my gosh, I did really well for myself this month. And when I'm vomiting because of the pain I'm in, or I'm having a lot of cramps, or if it's late, I was about 35 days late for the first time in my life a few months ago too, because of the amount of stress I felt under, then that's a sign our body's letting us know something's not right here and we need to correct it. And so I really view the menstrual cycle as a gift of gauging, again, how well did I take care of myself this month. And someone shared, I had this intense pain that made me vomit once and even faint, luckily not each time. Yeah, I can relate. Wow. And so it is a gauge. And so how can we be in relationship with, wow, what is my body trying to tell me? For me personally, when I learned about my menstrual cycle, when I learned about Ayurveda in general, when I learned more about my digestion and my immunity and my organs, my microbiome, I realized how hard my body's working all the time to support me. And it almost makes me a little emotional, because I think of the ways that I've punished myself, or I think of the ways I've spoken negatively to myself. And my body's just doing the best it can with what it has. And so my big why with learning Ayurveda is understanding I want to help my body do its job. I want to help my body function to the best of its ability. So I'm like, I can control that, so how can I support that? And so that was a big wake-up call for me in 2018 when I noticed that I was vomiting because of the pain. And so for women especially, or anyone who identifies as a woman, the medicine of subtraction is so important. You know, so often we think about, what can I add? What can I do? What are the herbs I can take? What are the things I can do? What are the foods I can eat? I think the first thing to look at is, what can you start to subtract? So for me, I stopped working in the kitchen making ghee. I had better boundaries working at the restaurant. I let go of some yoga classes. I started to create more space in my schedule. And I understand that's also a privilege to do that as well. But whatever little things you can do, maybe you're the one that's always doing the carpool. Maybe this was pre-pandemic. Or maybe you're the one that's always doing the grocery shopping, right? Like, where can you ask for help? Where can you give off something so that you can experience rest, so that you can experience rejuvenation? So there's a couple qualities. We have Brahmana and Langana. And Brahmana is like this building quality, right? And Langana is this lightening quality. And in Ayurveda, we recognize 20 qualities, which are essentially 10 and their opposite, like heavy and light, cold and hot, oily and dry, smooth and rough, sharp, mobile, stable. And some of these are building and some of these are lightening, right? Like building is like the heavy, oily, stable. The lightening is light and mobile and dry. So you can start to look at these two qualities, Brahmana and Langana, building and lightening, and remembering that opposites create balance. And so if we're starting to feel really light, you know, feeling anxious, feeling dry, feeling scattered, experiencing sharp pain. Like anytime there's pain in the body, Vata is associated, that air and ether element, those light qualities. Then we want to hone in on the opposite. So thinking about warming, building, nourishing foods, like heavier foods. And the opposite. So if we're feeling really sticky and sluggish, and if our cycle, we're feeling, I want to differentiate between feeling lethargic and depleted, because sometimes when we feel tired or fatigued, we feel like, all right, I want to do the opposite. I got to move. I want to do something else to engage this energy. That's not always true. And so I really encourage you to, only you know what's going on in your life. And I'll tell you what, as a collective, we're in this pandemic, we're in a historical revolution, and that's a lot. And more often than not, what I see in my own practice is depletion, and so the medicine is rest. So it's not always, that's where it gets a little nuanced. Is, all right, I'm feeling lethargic. Do I want more activity? Do I want more movement, right? The opposite qualities. That's not always true. So I really invite you to think about that and notice what's happening in your life before doing the opposite in that way. But if you were feeling like maybe you had stagnation, right? Or like blood clots, or feeling lethargic because you've been laying on the couch watching Netflix, eating mac and cheese for like a week straight, then we might want to focus on the lightening qualities. And so that's when we want more movement, more lighter foods, lighter meditation practice, like an active meditation, like a walking meditation or a mantra meditation, versus the building, grounding meditation, which would be like maybe restorative yoga or yoga nidra, or even taking a shavasana, right? So that would be my first tip, is looking at how do you feel? Do you feel more heavy? Do you feel more light? And then honing in on the opposite to create balance. And so the menstrual flow, it's a byproduct of all of our tissues, right? We have our lymph all the way through our reproductive tissue. But it's mostly a byproduct of our first layer of tissue, the lymph, right? Because that's the vehicle for nourishment. It's the vehicle for every other layer of tissue. And it's also related to our rakta dhatu, or our blood tissue, right? And releasing excess pitta. And so a healthy menstrual flow tends to coincide with the lunar cycle. So we mentioned how the menstrual flow is about the same cycle as the moon. And you would menstruate on the new moon, and you would ovulate on the full moon. And the full moon, we would ovulate because the energy of the moon, it's like pulling the egg from the ovary, right? And it's like that pulling energy. Versus the new moon, that's when we're shedding and releasing. And so you could think of the first phase of your cycle, like after you finish menstruating, as the kapha phase, right? Or it's the follicular phase. And this is when it's a bit more building, and it's a good time to like do more activity, to get more engaged, do more vigorous exercise if that's something you like to do. And then we come into the pitta phase, as ovulation, and that's when our endometrium, it becomes engorged with our blood vessels, and it's in preparation for the fertilized egg, right? And so pitta is this energy also of doing and being engaged and organized and implementing. And then the vata phase was like a combination, I think, of the luteal and the menstrual phase. And so this is when, so in the doshas, we have vata dosha, we have apana vayu, which is a sub-dosha of vata. And apana vayu is the downward flow of energy. And it is so intelligent in that it knows when to release. Like, think about giving birth, right? It holds on until it knows it's ready to release, right? Or when we go to the bathroom, it holds on until it knows we have to go to the bathroom. And so same thing with the menstrual cycle. It holds on until it knows that it needs to go downward and flow. So it's this downward flow of energy. What can interrupt that is if we have too much upward flow of energy. So a lot of enthusiasm, activity, and excitement, like running and talking a lot. that can disrupt the natural flow that the body is trying to do. And so there's actually a quote from Sushruta, which is one of the Ayurvedic classical texts, and Sushruta is Ayurvedic surgery, and it's quoted that it's the weeping cry of the vagina for the deceased ovum when we menstruate. And so there is a sudden rise in Vata, right, that begins the period, right? So again, that apana vayu that's opening to release. And so if we start to look at the doshas in relation to our menstrual cycle, right, it's like leaning into the gifts of each dosha and leaning into how to balance ourselves during those different times of the month in relationship to the moon. So something I see a lot when it comes to our menstrual cycle is we're given advertisements of women in bikinis playing volleyball and wearing tampons, right, and going on with our lives during our menstrual cycle, which, again, sometimes we need to. We got to do what we got to do. But however you can, like when we're menstruating, we need to rest because we are in the Vata stage. And think about when you're menstruating as detoxing. And so it's not really the time to have the pizza and the ice cream and the chocolate, but we want to support the detoxification process by eating warm, well-spiced food like cleansing dishes. You might think of khichdi, which if you'd like to look up, it's basically basmati rice with mung beans and a bunch of spices like cumin, fennel, coriander, ginger, turmeric, black pepper. You can make it as soupy or as thick as you'd like, but that's a really nice cleansing dish. Or think about soups, just anything that's warm, comforting, cleansing to support the body in its cleansing process, and that's what it's doing when we're menstruating. And it's time for rest. So as much as you can, like letting go of the physical practice. Maybe going for a gentle walk if that feels nice for you, to keep things moving. And giving yourself that permission, right, to rest and to do less. And that's what's so important in our menstrual cycle that a lot of us perhaps don't pay attention to. And I wanted to note, we also want to support our Agni during this time because it is a cleansing process, and some ways that we can support our Agni or our digestive fire is, again, easy to digest foods and cleansing. And you might even consider making like ginger tea or peppermint tea. So depending on if you're feeling more heated or if you're feeling more heavy and bogged down. And so a couple things that I do to support my menstrual flow, because when I do take control of my schedule, when I do prioritize rest, when I do manage my energy, my stress, and the 3 pillars to health in Ayurveda are diet, sleep, and energy management. Right, so diet, sleep, energy management. Energy management is also related to celibacy, but it's also just about how are we managing our energy in our lives. So when I do prioritize rest, when I do rest during my menstrual cycle, I have experienced pain-free periods. I do feel fatigued, and that's normal because, again, our body's working. We have Vata working. We want to rest and support that process. So some natural ways that I support myself is I use a hot water bottle to support the flow. I take CBD. That's been really helpful for me if I do experience some minor cramping. I drink red raspberry leaf tea, and this helps to tone the uterine lining. So I drink about 3 cups of this tea during the first couple days of my menstrual cycle, and it really helps me, again, if I'm feeling a little crampy. And again, ginger tea or eating something cleansing like khichdi or something warm and supportive. So let me know if you guys have questions right now in the comments. I'd love to speak to that too. If you notice, so it's really individual, right? Your cycle. If you notice really sharp shooting pain, that can be an indication that there's a lot of Vata happening. So focusing on Vata balancing practices like warm grounding foods, oil massage, rest. If you notice that you're feeling agitation and heat in the body. That could be a sign that there's a lot of pitta happening. So you might focus on some pitta balancing foods, which are more cooling. Think of like coconut oil and fennel and dill and avocado. And for kapha, if you're feeling like stagnation or stuck, focusing on kapha balancing practices, like more lightning movement, lighter foods as well. So suggestions for perimenopause. So fun fact, for women, technically we start to enter perimenopause at 35 years old because that's when our hormones start to shift. And one of my teachers, Dr. Claudia Welch, which I highly recommend you look at as well, she has a book called Balance Your Hormones, Balance Your Life. It's a really lovely resource, and I've studied with her myself. She speaks about the bucket syndrome, where we have our sex hormones and our stress hormones. Our sex hormones being estrogen and progesterone, our stress hormones being adrenaline and cortisol. So as a woman, we have these full buckets, right? Through our 20s, we can kind of get away with things. You know, we can stay up late, we might go out, we eat things, and we're fine. We can bounce back quicker. At 35 years old, if we don't start to shift that lifestyle, right? If we don't start to subtract, then as our hormones start to shift and as we enter more into perimenopause, we can experience the hot flashes, right? We can experience more of those menopausal symptoms. And the more that we start to be proactive, and that's why Ayurveda is so much a preventative care practice, the more we can be proactive when we're younger, at 35 in particular, to subtract, to support ourselves, the transition will be much more easeful and smoother. And so what happens is that if we don't, make those changes and we're leading these really stressful, busy lifestyles, our body's priority is our stress hormones, right? So it will take from our sex hormones to create more stress hormones because it's thinking about survival, fight or flight. And with stress, when adrenaline goes up, so too does cortisol. So think about if you just like swerved in your car and like almost hit a tree, but you didn't. It's like the adrenaline goes up, but then you missed it and you're like, oh, thank God, I'm okay, I missed it, right? So the adrenaline goes down. But because when adrenaline comes up, cortisol comes up. Adrenaline can come down quicker, but it takes longer for cortisol to lower. So if we're continuously leading stressful lifestyles, then we might get more affected by little things like being 5 minutes late for work, by having a heart attack because we hurt someone in our house that lives there. We're doing the dishes and we know people are there, but then we hurt them and we're jumpy, right? That's like a sign there's a lot of cortisol in the bloodstream. So this is where stress management and support is so important to support us as we start to transition and our hormones start to shift. Do you get headaches around the time of your cycle? I personally do not get headaches, but if you do get headaches, that could be a sign of Vata, right? So it could be a sign of, balancing, anytime there's pain, think about Vata. Because Vata is also the only dosha that moves. It has that mobile quality to it. And so it therefore affects Pitta and Kapha, fire and earth and water. So when we manage Vata, the rest will follow normally. And so, again, thinking about, and Vata is so important during our menstrual cycle because Apana Vayu, the downward flow of movement is happening. We're in that Vata phase. So really being hydrated well. I think a good base is drinking half your weight in ounces. And so drinking a lot of lukewarm to hot water. We want to avoid ice water because that can dampen our digestive fire and can be shocking for the system. And resting, again, eating warm, nourishing foods and supporting yourself in that way. Self-care practices for severe cramping like childbirth. I think, well, Ayurveda does go deep into pregnancy and childbirth as well, which, again, like, I didn't learn any of this stuff in my Western education. And something that Ayurveda speaks about in terms of childbirth is the woman when pregnant, like, the woman should, it's said in the classics that she should meet all of her cravings in a healthful way. But even if she can't meet it in a healthful way, she should have it in an unhealthy way if that's the only way to meet the craving. And so Ayurveda reveres pregnancy so much because we are creating a soul in the body, and however the mother is feeling, that's going to translate to the child. And so it's about the energy of your conception. It's about how you're supporting yourself during your pregnancy, how you're being supported by other people during your pregnancy. Sorry, I'm not pregnant. My pains feel bad is what I meant. Okay. Well, I think that was a good question too, and I hope that was helpful for someone. Really support yourself. So if your pain is so bad, like a really nice practice is a castor oil or a coconut oil pack. Now, castor oil is really great for Vata and Kapha. So if you tend to run cold, if you tend to experience stagnation, if you tend to experience a lot of pain, castor oil could be a nice option for you. And you can make a nice castor oil pack by soaking a piece of flannel in castor oil, putting it on your low belly, putting a little saran wrap over that, and putting a hot water bottle over that and letting that rest for about 20 minutes. But if you want to do it like a simpler way, which sometimes I do, I just rub some castor oil on my low belly, put a face, like an old face cloth on top, and then a hot water bottle. So you don't have to soak anything. You could just physically rub it on your low belly. You could do the same castor oil pack, but with coconut oil if you're experiencing a pitta imbalance. Now, for the castor oil, I recommend, if you have a really painful, irregular cycle, I recommend doing this every day, for a month. Do it before bed or while you're laying in bed and watch Netflix or something. And you want to avoid that, though, during your cycle. Okay, so we want to avoid the castor oil or coconut oil pack while we're menstruating and only do it the weeks before we start menstruating. And again, it helps to just remove stagnation and is a really powerful practice. Why do you feel cold during your cycle? I think that's individual. I think some people can experience heat or cold. If you're feeling cold, that could be a Kapha or Vata imbalance. And again, just focusing on warming, cleansing foods like khichdi or soups or, sauteed veggies and ghee or coconut oil or avocado oil. And having a hot water bottle. And it could be a sign of circulation too, so it might be helpful to go for a walk if you're able. Any other questions? Was this helpful? There's so much to say about it. Can I speak about digestive upset during cycle? Yes. I guess it depends about your digestive upset. If it's constipation, if it's loose stools, it's normal to have loose stools during when we're menstruating. And again, we do want to support our Agni, like kindle our digestive fire while we're menstruating. So having, again, warm, well-spiced food and avoiding cold, damp, heavy, difficult to digest foods like wheat and dairy can be upsetting for the digestive tract. And drinking hot water with lemon or lime or plain hot water can be supportive as well. Ginger tea, really supportive for digestion. CCFT, cumin, coriander, and fennel, really lovely for digestion as well. What about feeling depressed during your cycle and before? Yes, I've been experiencing that lately. Absolutely. it's normal. We're fluctuating through our hormones, and I think it goes back to, again, like, how did I support myself during this month? And it's okay to feel a little low. You know what I mean? Like, we can normalize some of these feelings. It's okay to feel fatigued. It's okay to feel low. It's okay to, want to lay down and rest. So we can normalize these things and be okay with it. And I think that's where doing our breathing practices, doing our yoga practices, eating intentionally and mindfully. And mindful eating is really about just sitting with your meal, looking at your meal, appreciating your meal without the distractions of TV, the news, talking on the phone, FaceTiming. So I think that can be supportive as well. And some herbal support. So I know Molly Rituals has a Shatavari blend. Shatavari is a beautiful herb for women's health. But it's depending, and again, I recommend you check in with an Ayurvedic health counselor or a doctor or a nutritionist. I do sliding scale wellness sessions too, but Shatavari might be helpful. You could look into it. It is a bit more building in nature, so really good for like Vata or Pitta, not so great for Kapha perhaps. And Shatavari, it means 100 husbands. So really helps women's health and as an adaptogen as well, so helpful with stress and to regulate your cycle. So that could be helpful for mood as well. You could take a look at that. And then, is a heavy dragging feeling during menstruation a sign of stagnation, and how to treat in legs? I guess stagnation, you could look at, it's like blood clots, right? Or if you're feeling pain, that could be a sign of stagnation in your menstrual flow. How to treat in legs. Again, I'm not a doctor, but some things that can support circulation from an Ayurvedic perspective would be, of course, movement, walking, doing yoga, doing inversions like legs up the wall, and dry brushing, using the upward flow of movement. And then, do I recommend yoga during periods? Yeah, but shift your yoga practice to focus on that downward flow of energy, right? So, people have different opinions on whether or not you should do inversions during your menstrual cycle. I'm in the camp that it's not a good idea because we don't want to disrupt the flow, right? So our apana vayu, it's trying to go downward. And if we're inverting ourselves, we're disrupting the flow that our body's naturally trying to do. So I'm of the camp that we should avoid inversions during our menstrual cycle and yoga practice and focus on more like restorative postures and slowing down your practice and doing like Supta Baddha Konasana, right? Feet together, knees apart, laying back on a bolster, really utilizing your props, and yogi squats, really lovely as well. Right, just supporting the downward flow of energy. So I would consider that for your yoga practice. But of course, movement can be helpful. And if you're of the camp that like, I actually just want to lay on my couch during my menstrual cycle, like that's okay too. So whatever feels good for you, give yourself that permission. And then how to treat an extremely heavy flow. So that could, without knowing you, but that could be a sign of Kapha. So, and it depends though, but heavy for who, right? Because think about, again, a healthy flow is about 4 anjalis to your cupped hands. And so maybe your hands are bigger than mine are really small. So it's really individual. If it feels too heavy, you might consider looking at some kapha balancing practices to support you. All right. Well, thank you all so much for your questions. I really hope this was helpful. I really, again, want to just change the conversation to feel empowered in your menstrual health, to think of your menstrual cycle as a friend that's like letting you know how it's doing this month, and to pay attention to the moon and see where your cycle is landing. And if you do want to get off hormonal birth control, like talking with your doctor and making that transition if that feels supportive and safe for you. And if you're interested, I do, again, sliding scale Ayurvedic wellness sessions. You can find me at AyurvedaGirl_ on Instagram. And my website is rhythmofsimplicity.com. And again, thank you to Molly Rituals. And thank you all for your questions. And just, you're doing great. Take care of yourself. All right. Thank you.